Hello, and welcome to the Citizens of Craft podcast, where we explore the objects we love, the reasons we love them, and the people who bring them to life. I'm your host, Maegen Black. In this weird, wild digital world we live in, things that would have seemed impossible just a few short years ago have become the norm. We're not quite at the Star Trek transporter level just yet, but we can easily come together across time and space without any matter-energy conversion to hang out together in a virtual recording studio. Today, from the Canadian Crafts Federation offices in Fredericton, New Brunswick, we're using the good old internet and the expertise of our producers at VoiceEd Radio to host a global conversation, reaching clear across Canada and overseas to our first ever international guest speaker in the UK. Between the three of us, we are almost 9,000 kilometers apart. But my hope is that for our listeners, this conversation will feel like we're just four old friends drinking tea around the coffee table. Now, if that doesn't seem weird at all, well, then you might just be a little bit younger than I am, because I remember a world before the internet, and so this feels pretty wild to me. Joining us today for a conversation about the way things have changed, as well as what has stayed the same, I'm very excited to welcome two fascinating craft artists who have covered a whole lot of ground over the course of their careers. Born and raised in the UK, glass artist and serial collaborator Matt Durran studied in England and Denmark and has since exhibited in over a dozen countries worldwide, including the Musée National des Beaux-Arts de Quebec here in Canada. On the other side of the pond, well, I guess the pond and the park and some mountains and whatnot, we're joined by Vancouver-based ceramic artist Brendan Tang. Self-described as culturally ambiguous, Brendan was born in Dublin, Ireland, to Trinidadian parents and is a naturalized citizen of Canada. Studying in Canada and America, he has done residencies in the US and the Netherlands, traveled to India, Europe, and Japan, and has shown his work across 3 different continents. It's a worldly episode for you today, and I'm excited to jump right into the conversation on this week's manifesto statement. You believe in 10-digit technology. You connect more strongly with things made by a pair of hands, the original 10-digit machine. We start with ceramic artist Brendan Tang, reflecting on his relationship to this statement.
I teach occasionally at Emily Carr University, and I see it happen to my students as well. It's where people work with their hands, and it just fires up a part of their brain that they, don't get to do very often. And it's a really interesting thing. And I would say, for a long time, I used to be like, with my practice, I would always be like concept first as being the most important. But I feel like as I'm kind of getting older, I have to sort of acknowledge the sort of kinesthetic element of it and how it is the movement of material with my hands and the shaping of things before me that is really like acknowledging that is super important. Just because I think that's a really exciting element of it and a really important
Mm-hmm.
element of it. And I think for me, this idea of the 10-digit technology, like I think my making process is a way of processing the world around me and sort of making sense of things. And so I think that's kind of where, like the 10-digit revolution, I was like, yeah, no, that makes sense. I like that.
And Matt, what were your thoughts about it when you first heard that statement?
It took me back to when I had my old studio. We had some naughty boys come around, and they were looking for bits of scrap metal to sell to make some money. And we befriended them, and they saw that we were working with glass. And I heard one of them say to one of the other boys, "Look, let's go. There's nothing here. These guys work with their hands. They're dead poor." And
Oh,
really struck me that there was this perception that somehow working with your hands was a lesser thing um, than anything else. And you know, it's interesting that we have this perception that somehow using your intelligence through your hands is somehow there's a devalue there. You wouldn't question it if it was a surgeon, by the way. But I mean, but
Hmm.
I think for me, it was a real driver that I really felt that I really wanted to convey to people that there's a power in making. And interesting enough, years later, I was invited to be in an exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum called "The Power of Making," and it was the most
Hmm.
visited exhibition they've ever had there. Um, because people are really interested in those stories. They're really interested in about how things are made and how things are put together. So that was my initial reaction to when I heard the statement. Is that that we have to really, it's really on us to show the world the value of what we do, especially when we're working
Hmm.
with our hands.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I really feel like, from my understanding of all our age brackets, let's say, I think it's pretty safe to
Mhm.
say that we've lived through some pretty tumultuous times when it comes to digital advancements, and the difference in the public's understanding of the value of making and hands-on work has certainly shifted. So, I grew up in the 80s and 90s where things really started to change to be more in the world of automation. I grew up in a city where car manufacturing was the number one industry, and that has completely changed in the time since I've left that town. In fact, I distinctly remember the first time that I saw an ATM machine, and I remember just being blown away by the fact that a robot could give you money randomly, no, outside of a bank. So we've really gone through this huge change where digital has become such a bigger part of our lives, and technology has really been connected to those ideals of monetary connections. So I do think that people don't quite understand all the time, or they've almost forgotten. I don't think they've entirely forgotten, but they've almost forgotten the importance of it. So I'm curious to know, in your lives, Matt, you described that experience talking to those younger people about their understanding of what you were doing. What are some of those things that you've seen change? What are some of those things that indicated to you, our world has changed as we know it?
Well, I think probably from a glass perspective, the process of annealing glass. When I was at college, there was a machine that used to cut a metal plate out a certain shape, and that would give, and a needle would follow that shape, and that would tell you, that would do a cycle of firing for you as far as annealing the glass.
Mm.
Um, we've moved to a small computer, which I can do from my phone to operate my kiln.
Mm.
That for me, from a glass perspective, is very tangible to what you're saying. Um, but it's interesting, the digital craft, and how it's impacted, because um, I think people are suddenly realizing that, and have done for a while, that you can actually use this technology as a tool in your practice, and it doesn't take away
Mhm.
from what you do and how you conceive your ideas and how you present your work at the end of it. So, but I think for me, I'm mainly working with kilns, and I have to it's a few degrees makes such a massive difference in what I'm trying to do.
Mhm.
And so I need that real level of accuracy, even though I do come down and do manual firings in the middle of the night just to check everything is going okay. I, s- I s- it, it's just having that level of manipulation with the hot glass, that we just not really had before. Like I say, we used to cut out a piece of metal into the shape, and the needle would follow that shape, and that would allow that to do a sort of semi-automated firing. And now it's all automated, but you still have to know your stuff. You still need to know your temperatures that you want to achieve, and that only comes by experimentation, um,
Mhm.
which you learn over a period of time. So I actually can do things in a very organic way as far as the firing goes, but I have the backup of the digital technology as far as the computer that records how I'm doing it, and where I do it. So it's a good recording device for. So that's very much in the hot melting glass technology, but that's the impact I've seen over that period of time.
Yeah, we're seeing that pop up in different means and ways across different mediums and in different, even in our everyday lives. Technology is right in the palm of your hand now, which it certainly wasn't before. Brendan, what are your thoughts on that whole stream? And do you remember a moment perhaps or a technology that changed where you thought, wow, this is
It's
going to
kind of
change
yeah, and
everything?
hard to sort of pinpoint a point when I definitely felt that. I think and I think it's because I've always been like an early adopter for computer technology and all of that sort of stuff, and have been kind of excited about what's been going on within that in that space. And so I think one of the big things for me for computer technology has been the connectability, like what we're doing like right now. This is mind blowing that we're kind of traversing such great spaces and having this
Hmm.
conversation together. And I think that was like, like even like a simple text conversation. Like I remember being in Toronto and just kind of at a restaurant, and then texting with a friend back in BC, and just having a conversation. I didn't feel alone like while I was having this meal with by myself in Toronto, and it was just like this really kind of great thing. And I was just like, I think there is something that's really
Mm-hmm.
fantastic about that. I really love technology that kind of disappears into the background and allows those maybe social connections to happen. In terms of my own practice, like I think if anything, our current sort of digital landscape and its constant need to be updated and upgraded only makes me appreciate the 32,000 year history that I have or we have with ceramics, where it's just like I don't need to update my clay body to the latest operating system and then have
Mm-hmm.
it have it not work. You know what I mean? It's like that's constant fear about my aging laptop or
Mm-hmm.
cellular phone. It's just like, if I update this thing, do I have to buy another one? And then what does that mean? And then, and I think yeah, it's funny, like,
Mm-hmm.
listening to Matt talk about this, and it's I and how it's changed in the studio. Like, I have a computer controlled kiln, and that's a really a fantastic thing to have. But most of the tools and equipment that I have in my studio are so, they haven't innovated in the last like 400 or 500 years, or electricity was the big innovation, maybe.
Well, yeah, I mean, you both alluded to this, the idea that you're utilizing these tools, maybe there's modern practices and modern ways of actually engaging, but all of those things are
Hmm.
intended to advance the things that we are directly connected to already that have been sort of enduring. So whether it's the craft practice itself or the materials that we're working with, or just the social connection of our
Hmm.
humanity. So all these new techniques and tools have helped us to do that. But both of you still work with those really enduring craft practices, with those, you mentioned 30,000 plus years of ceramic history. So you're both really connected to and engaged in, and obviously inspired by, I think, the digital culture and the digital opportunities that we have at our fingertips here. So what do you think about this blend? And I'm sure it comes up often, this blend of reconciling new technology and old technology. So Matt, what do you think about that?
Oh, it's really interesting actually, because I've just been sitting here thinking about this, and I just completely realised that I actually should have maybe discussed about a project I'm doing in Sweden called Glass Tech. It's called Glass Tech Glass Hack, and what we've done is we've managed to live stream the glass blowers making the work with an interaction with science and medical researchers, and from all over the world, and they can actually be in the room in the hot shop while they're making their glass. They communicate through the internet, and the glass blowers have had to develop a language to convey what they are doing, and the scientists have had to
Mhm.
develop a language to explain exactly what they want. But the fact that they can actually adjust and change in the making process has just been really amazing for them and for us. Um, and the advancement in their research has just gone tenfold. And we felt that a lot of glass making is done remotely in remote places, and this is a way of connecting up with with their clients, with architects, designers, artists, and medical researchers and scientists. So it's interesting because glassblowing is such an ancient ancient technology. But by bolting on some new technology, we're able to create a whole new space for that craft approach, and suddenly it doesn't feel
Hmm.
like it's something old fashioned or out of date. It feels really relevant to where we are now because of the advancements of science and medical research. They need innovators. They need people who can make imaginary jumps, leaps, and pull all sorts of different strands together. And if you've got an artist maker who can blow glass, mixing them with medical and scientific researchers just really opens up this whole new set of possibilities for everybody, for the scientists and for the art and for the craftsperson.
Can you give us an example of what one of those things might be? Like what would have been an outcome from the scientists and artists working
Okay,
together through the project you mentioned?
okay. So we were working with an artist called Shelley James, and she was in collaboration with a geneticist who is working on um, a lot of people who have later life lose their hearing, and a lot of it's to do with the hairs in your ears, and they get depleted, and then you're not able to pick up the vibrations that then allows you to hear, and so hearing losses comes about, and what she's trying to do on the genetic side is re-establish those hairs in the human ear, and but she needed some way of illustrating what she was trying to do. So the idea of working with glass and working with an artist and making very thin strands of hair in glass to illustrate the formation that you would need within the ear to make it work. So this was a sort of combination of two people working together, and we invited them to come a couple of times to Sweden. Shelley James, the artist, came and did a residency, and then she was able to work on 3D printed molds, so the glass could be made into the molds. So we'd have exactly the right equipment set up. And we were talking to the scientist who was at King's College in London, and she was there in the moment, and she was so excited by the process and seeing her work, her research being made into something physical that actually then amplified and showed how the process would work. That the next time she came, and she would never have come, but she came because she was so interested in how the project laid out, and she spent
Wow.
time learning about the material. And it's interesting that a lot of medical research that goes on now is really about bespoke making, because
Hmm.
development of medical research is going to go down towards specifically made for you, and so it's bespoke making, it's one-off making, and this lends it so well to a maker. We understand that, we understand process, and we understand material and understand the materials.
I just want to read a quick quote and then I'll ask Brendan to respond to that. But there's a scientist who lives and works in Ottawa at the University of Ottawa. He runs the factory lab there. And in 2016, he said this quote. His name's Andrew Pelling. He said, "We are only successful because we gathered artists and scientists together as a community into the lab and capitalized on that diversity of knowledge and expertise and experience." So I really feel like that hits right what you were talking about, Matt. But Brendan, what are your thoughts on that? Have you had that kind of experience? Maybe not in the scientific field, but where
Hmm.
technology and craft are coming together to inspire new ideas.
Yeah, I think yeah, there has been moments where it is kind of bled over, and I think that's kind of the interesting thing about our technologies today is that they are kind of seamlessly worked into our in our lives. sometimes whether we want it or not, when I sort of find myself on Instagram and I'm like, what am I doing here? I've been here for 3 hours. What's going on? But I think, like, in terms of my own practice as a studio artist, I think there has been a number of times where technology has come in either through the prototyping process, could be through sketching, or as I'm working on a piece, I'll take a photo of it to and then draw on top of it using my tablet to kind of get some ideas about surface treatments and that sort of thing. So it is kind of integrated into the process of making. There's times that I've done 3D modeling and prototyping for larger projects that I'm not going to execute in ceramics, but have done made into larger public artworks or whatever. There's a project that I did where I did a collaboration with another artist, and we did an augmented reality work.
Mm.
His work is mostly digitally made, and his name is Alex McLeod, based in Toronto. And we did a project called Love Child, where I made like a ceramic object in part, and then he virtually filled in other parts of it, and that was a pretty fun one.
Wow.
Um, but I think, like, one of the other really amazing things about, technology, it's like, I always think like ceramics is like a large umbrella term for all things in clay. Like, the umbrella that the word technology, is that's a massive one. And just sort of thinking about like social media and how that's had a massive impact. And the internet has had a massive impact in terms of getting my images out. Like, I really started my art career in a very small town, Kamloops in British Columbia, when I came back from grad school. And, no one would ever think that you could launch an art career from there. You would have to move to a large urban center or whatnot. But I was able to get my work online and then use that as a virtual portfolio and into the inboxes of curators or, museums or art dealers or whatever. And so I think, I remember duplicating slides and get, how cost prohibitive that was
Hmm.
as an emerging artist to, get slides done, one, and then, spend hundreds of dollars getting them reproduced, and then another, even more money to mail it out, and all of that nonsense. So that's been really crazy. And then I also think, how digital technologies has affected the way I learn as well. Like, if I have a question, I'll go to Google or go to YouTube or go to something, or even go to, like, Facebook and ask, do a general ask on Facebook. It's like, anybody know how to do this? And they'll be like, oh yeah, check this out. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of amazing.
I turn to that critical craft forum online on Facebook all the time to get information about the community
Hmm.
and what's happening. And I can
Hmm.
definitely relate to the idea that you're working from maybe a smaller center or not necessarily right in an urban area, or even if you are in one urban area, being able to connect with people who are across the country or across the world in similar
Yeah.
or different spaces. There's so much more accessibility if you have the tools. Like, obviously you need the internet, but with that,
Yes.
you can share a lot further. And I think it's interesting to think about how the digital realm has opened a new door for us to share these intimate spaces, whether it's our
Hmm.
work or our studios. There's Twitch online where people are live streaming, they're making ceramics. There's also
Hmm.
people playing video games on there, but
Yeah.
it's a tool to do that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
in your own practice, how have you used this digital realm to maybe connect online or use your tactile work to double as digital content?
Hmm. I think definitely, I'm a big fan of Instagram, and I tried Twitter, but I'm not kind of a words kind of guy. So I was when Instagram came along and started getting traction, I was just like, okay, yeah, this seems like a fitting way to go. And yeah, no, it's been really fantastic. Like, I've been able to share not only finished works, but in process what I've been doing and all of that stuff. I think it's sort of taken a while for me to figure out how to use Instagram, in the sense of, like, this is another funny thing of being a pre-internet person, is that these notions of branding and social media identity are really kind of a nuanced game. And
Mhm.
and sort of for a long, not putting a lot of food pictures or board game pictures up on my on my site was a learning curve. But yeah, no, I think that's been a really fantastic thing. Of course, Facebook has been really amazing, and then I had done a blog when blogging was a thing. And I have a close friend, Carol Epp, who still does musing about mud, and that is just still an incredible resource. And it's just, it's like really kind of amazing how all of this, how we're all connecting with one another and going to conferences, ceramic conferences. It's just like, have I met that person, or did I just meet them on Facebook? I can't remember.
I'm
It's been
excited
amazing.
to say that Carol will be on a future episode of the Citizens of Craft
Oh,
podcast. I'm excited
fantastic.
to have her on. And you alluded to the conference connection too, and I want to bring that up with Matt because Matt and I just met recently for the first time at Collect in London, and we both happened to be there in person, but to be able to communicate in advance of that through email and touch base, it opened doors to meeting each other there, and then that just expands beyond then. But Matt, you're connected with all kinds of international organizations beyond your home base. So I'm sure that the internet has played a big role and technology played a big role in your connections there. What kind of innovative activity have you come across or experienced because of those international connections?
Well, I'm not. I'm quite a good talker, and I just seem to get invited in to do things because of that. I think sometimes visual artists, are very good doing the visuals, but not always great at putting themselves across in the way they speak. And actually, this has led to me being invited to many symposiums to do with glass, and led to making films about those experiences. But I actually currently I'm on the board for GAS, which is the Glass Art Society in America, but they are looking to be more international, and I'm like the European representation of that. And we are working. We just had a conference last year at Murano in Venice, and then we will do a conference in Sweden next year. So I'm very involved in that. I'm also on the Craft Council in England, as a director. Um, and the it's for me, it's just really important. I've been so blessed, so lucky to work in the craft sector, and met some incredible people, and I've always felt that the onus is to give something back. And I felt that these organisations needed some new voices on their boards, and so I've been lucky enough to be on that, and to put the perspective of the maker on those boards is really important. And
Mhm.
how we shape things, and how we're going to connect with people, and how do we expand outside our sort of ghetto of
Mhm.
people. And and actually, I'm finding with craft now, more and more people are identifying themselves as craftspeople through all sorts of different industries. um, and that's a great thing, because if you took companies that take the word well crafted as part of their mantra for what they produce, if craft organisations received £1 for every time that happened, or $1, they'd be quite wealthy organisations. Because
We'd be rolling in dough, yes.
a lot of people want to be associated with craft because because there's a level, there's a sort of standard there that's above.
Hmm.
Well, I think there's a standard there above anything design wise, and I think there's a standard there above artworks, because I think there's an honesty and truth in the making process that you don't always get in those other industries. But certainly, I think more and more people want
Mhm.
to be associated with something that, with the craft sector. It's just seems to come all the time.
And I really appreciate your comment about people being involved in organizations and bringing that together because the Canadian Crafts Federation works with all the provincial and territorial craft councils across Canada, and I've seen firsthand how people get inspired, they get excited, they share information, we communicate all the time through digital technologies, and we're all starting to explore what that really means from a craft council perspective, from a guild perspective, from an individual artist perspective. It's certainly something that's top of mind for everyone right now, as it should be. I'd want to change the subject a tiny bit, just a slight direction. It's not uncommon for us to discuss in the craft sector relatively new approaches to making. So whether it's lasers or 3D printing or maker spaces, all these things are kind of hot right now or have been for a little while. But we don't just care about the technical skill and the material that's changing. And you alluded to that, Matt and Brendan. Um, you know, we often talk about how things are made, but what's also important is what exactly is being made, because craft reflects the world around us. So it reflects that value that people have in the word craft, the idea that it's higher level, or it's got something special to it. People understand that, whether or not they can articulate it. So what exactly is being made, and what are your thoughts on this? How have digital pop cultures had an influence on the making and the concepts that are being produced right now and the conversations that come out of that? Um, Brendan, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I feel like on one hand there is a real celebration of what's going on with makers, and I see a lot of, and sometimes enviously, I see careers of younger artists in their 20s just blowing up online, and just an amazing, enviable amount of traction that they're developing. And I think that's really a fantastic sort of side of the sort of the megaphone that you can get through digital technologies and social media and all of that sort of stuff. And I find that a really kind of a fantastic, exciting thing. And so a lot of people can kind of get on board without having to travel or search them out. Now, everybody has real easy access, and you can just look up a hashtag Cone6 Blue, and you probably come up with a million hits on that one.
Mm,
Um, so that's a really fantastic kind of thing about it. I think there's also a funny thing. I think there's always that danger of the homogeneity of things. Like
mhm,
there is a sameness, like where the fact that you can get images out and I can see what's happening or in different parts of the world, and in doing so, like I've seen certain things start to homogenate within the community. So it's interesting to kind of see those things ebb and flow. And you definitely see, opposed to regional fashions or tastes, it's now just it's becoming almost like a singular kind of
mhm. It's a global
thing.
look, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
how do you try
yeah.
to fight against that? Because Brennan, your work is very distinctive. It's very unique. It blends tradition and contemporary work all together. So how do you speak to that angle of trying to have that uniqueness in a world that's very homogeneity focused?
Yeah, and I think that I don't know. I think that's just like I think that's kind of like the art kind of side of it. It's just you kind of just do your own thing, and just you'll be in fashion and out of fashion as it goes. But um yeah, I don't know. I think that always comes kind of back to you, and thinking about how the world is filtering through you, and what you want to say about it, or even what you just want to deal with on your own, and make sense of. And I think you know maybe you're just talking to yourself, and it'll land somewhere. But I think that's probably the more the focus, I guess. In a similar way, like thinking about like old technologies and new technologies, like they're all just tools. They're all just tools being filtered through you,
Hmm.
and the material is just filtering through you. I think there is, I get wrapped up on trends and excitements. I love sort of that low polygon, sort of smooth surfaces of old video games. Kind of trend that's going on right now, and
Hmm.
I'm just like, oh, that's kind of all I want to make. But I'm just like, I'm just kind of reflecting what's so popular right now.
So Matt, how do
Yeah.
you try to approach that in this world where we're exposed to so much at all times? How do you kind of put your own Matt Durran stamp on things?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. There were kind of two strands there that we were just talking about. That I was involved in a medical research project where um, it was to do with reconstruction of the human nose, and we my normal approach would have been just to take a rubber cast off the nose of the patient. The patient was going to lose the nose to cancer, and they wanted to reconstruct the nose. My normal approach would have been to take a rubber mold off the nose, and then I would have that as a record to work from.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, what we ended up doing was we just ended up just doing a 3D scan of the nose, and we were able to produce a 3D printed wax of the nose, and I was able to make the glass from that 3D wax. And it just struck me as that as a way of recording things, it was quite interesting for me. So I could scan some objects that I was interested in, or forms, and then I could do a 3D print of that, and then I could work that into the glass. And so it's almost like, I think there was a time when artists were given the opportunity to work with scientists. The artists would have a great time. And the scientists would end up with some nice photographs of the lab, whereas now I think it's much more how can the artists facilitate the scientists. So, and I think that actually then informs your own practice. So I think all the projects that I do that involves me handing over my skills and my knowledge is then given back to me by the inspiration of what these projects are involved. So I find that informs my art practice more and more, is the fact that by trying to work with other industries, actually that conversation then feeds back into my own work. So that's kind of where I am now.
Wow.
So yeah, that's kind of the way forward for me, because it's about I don't know, it's about giving your time, giving your energy, but it reaps its rewards back to me when I'm working on my own in the studio, making my own work.
Fascinating. Yeah. It's, I mean, anytime that you give and share in that way, and you're both walking away from that experience with either a new perspective or a new set of skills, I think that is such a storied part of almost the apprentice artist, master apprentice experience of sharing that information. We might not be doing it in the ways that we would have seen in the past necessarily. Sometimes, yes, but for the most part, there's these whole new, digital means of doing that kind of apprenticeship. And I don't just mean about the way that you're communicating, but the tools and the technologies that you're exchanging and learning. And it's really, really interesting to see craft be a really important part of that process for all different sectors. And I think there's something interesting to think about from that like living culture perspective about the difference in thought process that craft provides. Craft has this inherent humanity and this tactile experience that we miss a lot during the run of our everyday lives. Like, for the most part, all we do is press buttons and swipe, and like we might be really good at swiping, but we're not necessarily so good at stitching. You've been listening to the Citizens of Craft podcast, produced by the Canadian Crafts Federation. For today's segment, the topic at hand, we are bringing you another international perspective. Thanks to an essential partnership with our affiliate members at the Craft Alliance, I was lucky to travel to London as part of an educational mission. Over 4 days, I joined more than 13,000 audience members at the UK Craft Council's premier annual event, Collect. Here, I was exposed to the work of over 400 craft artists from around the world, all contained within the vast walls of London's beautiful Saatchi Gallery. During this trip, I had the chance to chat with the UK Craft Council's Executive Director, Rosy Greenlees. Take a listen to my chat with Rosy on the bustling showroom floor of Collect. So, Maegen Black here from the Canadian Crafts Federation with another series for the Citizens of Craft podcast. And I'm very lucky to be here in London on the ground at Collect. And I'm here joined by a very special guest.
My name is Rosy Greenlees. I'm Executive Director of the Crafts Council, which is the national body for the support and promotion of craft in the UK.
Mm-hmm. So this year is 2019, and it's looking like it's been an even bigger and better collect than has been in the past. You've got 45 galleries on site here today?
We have, yeah. It's been absolutely fantastic year. That's the most galleries we've ever had, international, from as far afield as the US, Europe, China, Japan, Korea. And we have about 11 new galleries this year as well, which is absolutely fantastic, all showcasing the very most high quality contemporary craft.
That's fabulous. I'm so excited to be here and to see what we could potentially do with Canada on the grounds in the future. So tell me a little bit about why it's important for the Craft Council to take on a project like Collect.
So Collect has been going for 15 years. We had 5 years at the V&A, and we've just spent the last 10 at the Saatchi Gallery. It's a really important moment in the year as being a high-profile event, which brings everyone together, gives them a chance to network. But most importantly, it's about the selling and the developing of the market for high-quality craft. And it became obvious to us that actually the way to try and improve and increase the value of craft and the standing and the status of craft was by developing a fair like this. So it's absolutely about developing the market, giving profile to contemporary craft at the highest quality, and supporting galleries to be able to showcase and sell work.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree that's an important thing for any organization that's involved in craft to undertake, increasing that appreciation and the value for craft in general. You're not only the executive director of the Craft Council, but you're also the president of the World Craft Council International.
Indeed,
so
yes.
You certainly got your fingers in a lot of pies when
Yeah.
it comes to craft. What's your own personal driving vision? Why craft, and what would you like to see happen in craft?
So I've always worked in the visual arts. I love craft. The reason is because I love the materiality of it. I love the aspects, the functional aspects of it. Of course, not all craft is functional, but I like that practical, pragmatic nature of craft. I love it because I think it's very accessible. I think it speaks of human values.
Mm-hmm.
There is a very sort of visceral and sort of deep-seated sense of being connected with material things. I love the way it's about how something is made as well as how it's thought about as well, and that idea of the sort of the head, the hand and the heart, that people think through the act of making, they learn through the act of making. It's not all about just a sort of reading something on a piece of paper. I find that tremendously exciting, and I think what I find really compelling at the moment is the way in which, of course, craft has a fantastic heritage and a history, but what's so exciting at the moment is that whole idea of new materials and the use of materials sustainability, and how the materiality of our world is actually becoming more important rather than less in a digital context. And so from a science and technology perspective, how new materials and old processes are being used to address many of the really significant problems of our world, and that makers can bring something to the table in that respect. But also it's around the social aspects, the health aspects, about how craft can help in terms of health and well-being. And I think it also speaks about identity as well. So I think it's an enormously important thing at this point in time. And although we've gone through a period where digital technology has been very important, people, I think, have begun to understand again that we do live in a material world, and that actually we have hands and we need to use them. And so I think it's an enormously exciting time for craft.
Now back to our main interview with glass artist Durran and ceramic artist Brendan Tang. We're kind of at a loss in our everyday of that tactile connection. So by bringing that to people who are working in different fields, I think they can really, really benefit from it, since it's not something that you necessarily get in your daily life or your home life or even in school all that often. I was almost surprised to hear you say, Brendan, that you had ceramics in high school, because that's fairly, rare these days. So, there's no reason why we can't see craft as an escape from technology, but also an inspiration, technology being an inspiration for craft. There's no reason why we can't make a video game about craft. There's no reason why we can't do an embroidery that depicts, technological aspects of our everyday life. So it goes both ways there. And I just want to mention a really cool artist who is working with a couple of people in Ottawa. He's an Inuit artist named Jesse Tunglik, and he's currently building a sealskin spacesuit. So it's an art piece,
Oh, wow.
but it's reflecting all of these different things, and he's working with the scientific community to kind of develop this thing. So the world is full of this interesting blend that's happening right now. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you see that kind of dichotomy in your work, or why you still feel like that tactile practice is really of value to yourself or to society at large even. So Brendan, what do you think of that? It's a big idea, but does anything jump out at you
No.
in there?
Well, it's I was like, as you were talking, and like there's a funny thing about technology and the ideas of technology, and like the craft and versus technology, and I almost see it like it's just like a general continuum, because like
Mhm.
if you look at my studio, and I'm sure if you go over to Matt's studio as well, is that you will see a lot of old technology, and I'm thinking of my friends that are in printmaking. It's like that's even, that's also old technology, and photography is old technology, and it's like artists always kind of pick up like where that sort of bleeding edge, because sometimes the bleeding edge of technology is incredibly cost prohibitive. Like it's amazing to have access to a 3D scanner, but of course, like as an artist that's running their own studio, like
Mhm.
I can't afford an Oculus Rift
Mhm.
or the team that would help animate work in there. So it's kind of interesting, like, to think about how it's like, not that this might sound terrible, but it's like my studio starts to become like like the end part of the old technologies, like, where I'm just like, "Oh, look at this. I've got an old typewriter. This is exciting, and let's see what kind of work I can make from this." Um, but it's like I do feel like we are part of that continuum, and I think, yeah, there is some really beautiful things that are happening on the bleeding edge of technology that inspires my work. And there are sometimes I feel like, especially with the work that I do, that is so heavily influenced by the allure of technology, with like the Mango Ormalu series, having like robotic parts and all of that sort of stuff. I'm trying to encapsulate sort of. That sort of lather that we whip ourselves into when they announce what the new iPhone can do. And with my own work, I'm trying to get that sort of Christmas morning feeling going on. And I think, yeah, I think that's kind of a really interesting sort of place and space to work within.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Matt, how do you feel about that blend? That everything is kind of interrelated right now, and someone can approach craft from a tech perspective, they can approach tech from a craft perspective, and they can be involved with both of those things without having any background in that, just based on new relationships and new experiences in society. So, again, it's kind of a big question, but why do people connect with this continually, no matter how it's being experienced?
I just really think that I think people live in very pressurized jobs. I used to teach five women at a small college, and we just did an introduction class, and they all five of them were social workers, and they were dealing with really really difficult cases, and they just needed some space to go away from all that and just download themselves and just and relax through making. And I just thought there's such a power to that. There's such a power to making things.
Mhm.
I think when we're bombarded with so much information and technology, then I think that we do need we need these quiet meadows that you can go to, and I think that craft can give you that. For me, I'm always a little bit wary not to get too involved in a specific bit of equipment. I try to keep everything these days quite low tech. I feel that you can make something complicated, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's good. It's just complicated. And for me, I do like to go back to things being quite simplistic. My work's quite simplistic in that way, and I had some friends who had a studio, and they were producing glass blown vases, and they had a little technique to heat the bottom of the hot vase. And then one day they went to an auction and they bought a flatbed grinder because it was very cheap. And then they did a few vases that way, and the clients liked what they saw. So then they had to employ somebody to run this big piece of equipment. And I said to them, has it improved anything? And they said, no, our costs have gone up because we now got this big piece of equipment, and we've got somebody having to sit there all day operating this piece of equipment. And so sometimes the technology becomes a burden rather than actually making your life easier. It can make your life more complicated. So I am kind of risk averse in that way, but then I also want to embrace new materials. And usually, when you embrace new glass materials, you have to embrace new technology.
It's that never-ending dance, right? I'm sure it's been going on. Maybe now it's a little bit more high speed, but that constant like testing things and seeing what works, and not just continuing on straightforward in a direction because this is the new way to do things and we have to do things the new way. I like the expression that you kind of coined there to downloading yourself into craft, just taking that moment to reconnect with that human element that can be so beneficial from craft. So that leads me to sort of our last question for the day. And it's kind of a big question. I think it's just a continuation of the conversation we've really been having. But, what do you see as the most important role that craft can play in your life, or even in, larger society, or for the greater good of the world? Like, what do you see this mix of craft and technology? What do you see that doing next? And I'll turn it over to you first, Brendan.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
I'm hitting hardballs at
Well,
you
let me
guys.
look into.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm just dusting off the crystal ball right now, and yeah, no, I think there is some really interesting things that are going on. I think, like I was kind of joking about how, old tech or technologies, the new technologies of yesterday will end up in my studio as a new thing, but I do feel like the cost limits are dropping substantially, and having access to things like that. Like I know 3D printers not too long ago were like
Mhm.
$5,000, and now you can get a 3D printer that's relatively decent for like $300 off
Mhm.
online. And having access to that sort of thing, and then 3D modeling software, you can probably find something you can run off your phone and then send to that 3D printer. So I think that those financial bars are definitely lowering and lowering, and artists will have access to that sort of thing.
Mhm.
In terms of the idea of how like craft interfaces with that, I think that we're all kind of, I think that sort of kinesthetic dopamine hit that craft can deliver like nothing else. I think people will always sort of search that out, and I always, like think about how people enjoy making and being part of having agency within what they are doing. And also completing tasks that can be completed within a relatively small time frame in terms of like making something.
Mhm.
I think that is something that's beautiful about that. And then of course the skilling up that working within craft-based materials requires, I think, is something that is attractive to a lot of people.
Mhm.
And yeah, and that probably will continue. It's funny with technology, there it seems to be, and I think this is design in general, it's like very much part of that sort of trying to make things as easy as possible for people. And sometimes craft is counterintuitive in that regard. Like I often tell people when they're learning how to make ceramics, it's going to be like listening to somebody learning how to play the violin. It's going to be kind of terrible for the first little bit, but then it'll click and things will start happening. And yeah, I think there's something that people find exciting about that process as well.
Tripping your way through to beauty, right?
Hmm.
Matt, would you agree with that? Do you have a different perspective on that?
No, I would agree with that. But I would just say that I think we're just moving. The advancement of science and medical technology is moving so fast that but you've got this sort of perfect storm, because a lot of the PhD students who do a lot of the legwork as far as research go have basically pursued an academic career, and like you say, the lack of craft being taught in schools, in primary schools, they're coming out with not great skills as far as using their hands in an intelligent
Mm-hmm.
so they're working in a very abstract way, and yet they're being asked and demanded through the research to make something that's physical. Well, when you don't understand about the process and about the material and about how to use your hands in an intelligent way, there's a shortfall there. And that actually stifles research, and it actually holds research back. So my big
Mm-hmm.
hope for the future is that there's going to be a recognition of this, and that artist makers and craftspeople will be more involved in those areas of research, which in a sense will supplement their art practices. So that will be a lifeline for their art practice to keep them going, especially when you're an emerging artist, to know that your study has got these other areas that you can move into, and that will solidify their art practice, and also see the value of actually of making. So that's my kind of hope, my digital hope for the future, is that we can that there's this reconnection, which I think is happening actually, and that your skills that you learn through craft are life skills that will last your whole lifetime.
Today's episode of the Citizens of Craft podcast was created with the help of our friends at the Craft Alliance, the UK Craft Council, the Canada Council for the Arts, Voice Ed Radio, and of course, the many members of the Canadian Crafts Federation. Learn more about the Citizens of Craft movement at citizensofcraft.ca. There you can see the profiles of almost 700 professional craft artists in Canada. You can search by artist, medium, even location, to connect with artists where they live and work across the country. If you are a maker or a lover of all things craft, make a local connection. Look up your local, provincial, or territorial craft council to learn more about craft in your region. I hope you'll join us again next time on the Citizens of Craft podcast. And until then, craft on.